Welcome back to The Chase and the Truth. My name is Kristen, and we are here with Dan Willenborg. Dan, I met you through, well, it's kind of like been a chain of series. So
Sure.
First, my good friend Michelle was part of NAV, and then the Graham brothers, been working with them for a while, introduced me to Jordan, and then realizing that all of the edification that they've been giving to NAV agency, and they're like, oh yeah, Dan is one of the guys behind the scenes, and you're like the creator, one of the founders, right?
Yep. Yeah, I co-founded AptAmigo, which now has added the NAV agency as a brand in 2015.
Okay.
And I was the full-time co-founder. My business partner, co-founder, he's never been full-time. So it's really been kind of, a family affair for my wife and I and some of the early team members for a long time now.
Yeah. Well, and I had a chance to meet your wife at an event, and she is brilliant. You all are like the power couple behind the scenes.
I recognize that. I think the fact that I'm married to an attorney and such a strong-willed person has been just a huge asset for me personally and professionally. Absolutely. We complement each other well. In her professional life, I'm usually the person that's saying like, hey, wait a minute, slow down, be a little bit more diplomatic. And she's the person who's saying like, scorch the earth, destroy everything, like don't take no for an answer. So it's good that we have kind of that push and pull.
It's like you guys provide like a rock support for each of your capacities, right?
Yeah, I'd say, I was just talking to some people recently, and, there's been a lot said about the power of like a good relationship on your professional life. My view on that is really, I don't think somebody like my wife could date somebody like my wife. Like if the two of them were together, they're both very like type A. And don't get me wrong, I think there are a lot of type A people that are in couples. But I think for us, we really just sort of balance each other out. Like we help each other kind of like move a little bit more from each of our normal extremes. I'm the introverted one. She pushes me to get out. She's the extroverted one. I push her to like, okay, maybe not that extreme or, things like that. So it works for us. I think we're both, I would think she would say the same thing, but we're both, better off personally and professionally as a couple.
Yes. Yeah. What's so funny is I actually met her before I met you.
I was out of town. Yeah. You went to the mansion party. Right?
I did. Yeah. Yes. And so, and all of the real estate agents were like, oh yeah, but Dan is much more introverted. I'm like, really?
Yes. I really am.
Yeah. So. Well, I want to, and so for those of you all that are listening and got to hear Jordan Wainwright, so she was one of the first that I interviewed here on the podcast, and she was probably one of the biggest listens so far on this podcast. And I think because of what she's accomplished and knowing what she's accomplished, she's definitely paved the way in her own right, but now she's a part of a team that has really peeled back the layers, and you guys are the support. AptAmigo and NAB agency like fully provide the support for all your agents so that they can go out and like become who they're meant to become. So
absolutely. I think, we started in apartment locating, and originally, we can get into more of the story, but originally, like philosophically, my experience as an apartment locator back in Chicago from like 2016 to 2017 was difficult because I mostly did it by myself. And don't get me wrong, most agents that start in real estate, whether it's apartment locating or leasing on the MLS or residential, you sort of start by yourself and you sort of have this really steep learning curve, right? Like you have to figure a lot of stuff out. Like, how do I get leads? How do I talk to clients? How do I deal with buildings? How do I deal with landlords? How do I deal with all these different, how do I deal with mortgage brokers, right? Like there's this huge learning curve. And for me, it took about a year to be in a place where I could make enough money as a broker to be able to confidently say like, yep, this is viable for me to do full time with no other job. And so philosophically for me, it was all about like, how can we shorten that learning curve? Like even from the jump, it was like, how can we get people to be doing this successfully full time in weeks or months? And not everybody can, but that I found that to be like a really good goal. And then the second thing I'll say is that most real estate people are sort of operating alone. And so philosophically for me, what I learned was if I didn't have my COO, Rachel, like sitting next to me every day for that first year, I would have failed. I would have failed, right? Like, and I'm the same person, right? But just having somebody else there mentoring, working, collaborating is so important. So for Jordan, you know, my philosophy with Jordan and how the company has sort of like shifted is, you know, the other thing I learned was that there's 1,000 good uses of your time in real estate or in entrepreneurship, but there are 2 or 3 that are way better uses of your time. And in real estate, it's some combination of getting more leads and closing more leads. And if you're spending time on things that aren't doing that for yourself, or that are, you know, dragging you away from those things, you're going to make less money, and it's going to take longer to get up the curve to where you're sustainable and doing it full time. The last thing I'll say, because I'm starting to ramble, is basically I love what I do because I view AptAmigo and Nav as like a platform for independence, right? Like, how can people get to a place where if they want to take 2 months off, they can, right? Where they don't feel like working today, they can, right? If they want to go hard and make, you know, $30,000, $40,000, $50,000 in a month, they know what they can do to do that. So, and that's what kind of gets me up every day.
For those listening, like, now is the time to really like dial in. If you're in real estate and you want to learn some nuggets, when I was talking to you, I think it was the first time that I met you, we were having pizza. It was like a little like happy hour get together just to get the Austin family together, right? And you had, I asked you a question. You're like, I just didn't want to work for somebody anymore. And I was like, yes.
And that I think ties into a lot of what motivates people to get into real estate in the first place, is that independence. And it kind of goes back to my dad. My dad was like an engineer back in the day. He used to engineer black boxes for like fighter jets. That was like his first job out of college. And
that's a heck of a first job.
I mean, it was down in San Diego, and he really liked it. But eventually, he really just didn't like working for a boss, and so he pivoted. And he's like a personal financial planner. He's about to retire, but what he realized, it wasn't so much for him, at least, it wasn't so much being interested in personal financial planning and advising people, although I think he likes that. It was that he just wanted to be independent. He wanted to work for himself, and again, that's what I learned about myself. In my prior career, I worked in investment banking in New York for a couple of years and private equity in Chicago for a couple of years. And for me, I didn't have any problems with any of my bosses. I actually liked a lot of my bosses, and I stay in touch with a lot of them. But it was really more about wanting to be able to make my own decisions and kind of like learn and suffer the consequences. That's what kind of prompted me to like go out and start something on my own. I always felt like I was in an armchair, sort of like maybe criticizing people as like a hot-headed, you know, younger employee, where it's like, oh, if I ruled the world, I could do it better. And then eventually it was like, okay, prove it, right? And my co-founder really was, you know, instrumental and inspirational for sort of just pushing me off the cliff to kind of take that risk.
Yeah. So let's peel back some of those layers then. What was your, you know, you said your background was in the financial world. You know, take me back to college and like how you met your wife, and then how that ended up in AptAmigo first. And I will preface this, I have never seen a single piece of technology that, and I'm not in the leasing world from the mortgage side, but when Jordan showed me that, I was like, that is incredible. So
well, thank you. I appreciate that. So I went to college at Cornell in upstate New York. I grew up in Northern California, a town called San Mateo. It's just south of San Francisco. So the only, you know, I know I wasn't like that inclined towards technology. I was kind of more inclined toward, well, my major was like econ and history. And at the time, you know, I graduated college in 2008. It was a terrible time to get a job. I was kind of fortunate enough to get a job in New York working for Credit Suisse as an investment banking analyst. I did healthcare. Really kind of the first 4 years of my career, I kind of learned that I just didn't want to be in the healthcare industry for reasons that are just kind of boring. It just wasn't something that kind of attracted my interest. But so I did that for 4 years. The cool part of it was I got to be in boardrooms and talk to like really, really smart, really, really successful people as like a 22 to 23-year-old, which was really awesome. But again, I kind of developed this little bit of ego where it's like, oh man, if I ran the world, I'd want to do it a little bit differently or do things that way. But after about 4 years of that, I will say I was kind of lost. I was like, I don't know what to do with myself. I just know I don't want to do finance long term. No criticism to people, and many of whom are still my friends, have kind of gone on and become wildly financially
it's a great
successful.
Industry. Yeah.
Yeah, it's a great industry. I think what you learn, or what I've learned as you go through, one's career, my own career, to get to the upper echelons of anything, you got to learn sales. And to be good at sales, you neither need passion or necessity. And so in finance, I didn't have the passion, so I wanted to kind of create the necessity.
Right.
So that's what entrepreneurship was for me. I'll sit here and say that, like, I love real estate now, but I didn't love real estate as like a child. I know a lot of people are like, oh my God, I want to browse Zillow. I want to walk open houses with my parents.
Yeah.
I've kind of learned to love it through this sort of entrepreneurial necessity that I've created for myself.
I'll stop you right there for a second. That is a nugget that the younger generation, I think, needs to learn, because right now it's like, I have to be passionate about it or else I won't do it. And sometimes you got to learn to love it.
You got to learn to love it. And I will say that my personal experience is that very few people end up getting to do exactly what they've always wanted to do, right? Like, if you wanted to be a firefighter as a kid, or you always knew you wanted to be on the big screen, or, you wanted to be a doctor, right? Like, very few people end up getting to do exactly what they thought they wanted to do.
Yeah.
But there's more to a career than that in my personal experience. Like, there's being around like-minded people, there's like working on big problems, there's, other sort of things that can become kind of a passion for people. But I agree with you. I think having an aspiration to just work on something you're passionate about probably limits people a little bit. It certainly limited me. And I'm very happy with my outcome, even though, again, as a child, I wasn't super passionate about real estate, but I've learned to become passionate again about that platform for independence. That's something that motivated my dad, that I found like really motivated me. And that's really exciting for, I get fired up to help people like Jordan, like, grow her brand and grow her platforms.
I saw that whenever I was talking to you that first time, and you're like, so like, that's truly what motivates you whenever you see these newer, younger agents coming in. You're like, if I can support them, like, that's literally what drives you in this business.
Different. So I probably had to learn the sales part, or force myself to learn the sales part. Like so going back to the story, 4 years of finance, I went back and got my MBA. I went to the University of Chicago. I will say that I did feel a little bit like a fish out of water. I have many great friends who have gone on to, do tremendously cool things coming out of Chicago. But I'd say that MBAs generally, it sort of funnels people into like marketing, consulting, investment banking, which makes sense. You have to spend a lot of money to get an MBA, and so it's pretty important to get a good paying job, coming out of the MBA. And to give Chicago credit, there is a really great entrepreneurship program, and I and AptAmigo went through it even after I graduated, called the Polsky Center. But it's not sort of the culture of business school. It's not like, oh yeah, all the best entrepreneurs like go to business school. But I had a great experience, came out, took a job in tech for about a year. And that was, so I didn't start AptAmigo right away. This was like 2014. And it was that moment where I kind of made a trade. I made a trade on like compensation. If I had stayed in private equity and finance, I definitely would have made a little bit more money.
Right.
But I honestly wanted influencing my own outcomes, right? Like, this was sort of step one on that learning curve for like wanting independence or supporting independence. I just wanted a little bit more agency over what was sort of happening in my professional life, or the outcomes that I, was working on. And I didn't get that. Basically, I joined like a 150 person firm. I felt like I had a lot of value to add. In any big company, there's always politics. I'm not going to sit here and say there's not politics at my own company, that we could be faster, we could be better listeners, et cetera, et cetera. But taking the pay cut and then not being able to have the impact that I thought I would have, that wasn't going to work for me either. And so that prompted a conversation with my now business partner, where I sort of confided in him that, like, hey, didn't like finance, not sure about this sort of mid-size tech company employee thing, don't know what to do. Did not think I wanted to start a company. Very candidly, I thought I was going to go work for maybe like a bigger tech company, move back to the Bay Area.
Wow, that's so interesting.
Yeah, but he basically said, hey, Dan, you're a smart guy. Let's find a problem. shove you off a cliff. It'll be your thing. I'll help raise a little money for it, validate the idea, and just back you. And so I'm forever grateful to him. He's one of my best friends still, my business partner now. I gave a speech at his wedding, all that good stuff.
Amazing.
But he basically helped me push myself in a way that was uncomfortable.
Right.
And when I talk about that like passion or necessity as like a path to, really learning and growing and succeeding, he just pushed me off the cliff, right? It's like, can you swim?
Right.
But he made it in a way where it was like, I didn't feel like I was truly going to drown. Right. He was like, he was there.
So a little floaty.
Well, I got buy-in from him at, going back to my wife. I'd met her in 2010 when I just moved to Chicago. We had been together for a few years. We were, I think, literally getting engaged we were already engaged. We were getting married 3 months after I quit my job to start AptAmigo. And
she had some faith in you.
she had some faith in me, and I'm forever grateful for that. The funny story that I'll share here is that, so we started AptAmigo 3 months before our wedding. Our wedding was in August of 2015. And I lost about 15 pounds and I was at my like lowest weight. So some people, when they get super stressed out, they maybe eat more.
Binge eat.
I stopped eating basically because I was so stressed. We raised money from exactly. We raised money from my parents, from my friends. And so I felt, all this pressure. And I was basically lighting it on fire. We started AptAmigo as an apartment review website. We didn't become a brokerage for another year. And an apartment.
And what year is this?
This is 2015.
2015.
Yeah.
Okay.
No, thanks for anchoring me back on that. So I'm lighting money on fire. Our wedding's in 3 months. We're doing like choreographed dance lessons because my wife was like a junior lovable, which is the cheerleaders for the Chicago Bulls. And so she's an amazing dancer. So like her most important thing for our wedding was like choreographed dance, 3 songs. And I'm like 2 left feet. Like this is going to be terrible. So, I'm stressed about work. We're planning a wedding, all the drama associated with that. I lose like 15 pounds, but then, I look great in my tuxedo, right? Yeah. So it's like, but I would never recommend starting a company, especially one that had no chance of ever making any money, because we were, again, an apartment review website, which was just really a terrible idea. But it all kind of worked out, because kind of coming out of that, what happened is we started to get leads. We started to get people asking for help. And the irony of those early days was I was adamantly against becoming a brokerage.
That is so funny.
I had such like a negative view of brokers, especially in leasing, that I was like, no, there's got to be a different way. But everybody told me that first year, like, get your license. And then it took me a year and losing hundreds of thousands of dollars before I finally said, okay, I'm going to get my license, because if I don't, this probably won't work.
And where are you at this time? Are you living in Texas? You're still in Chicago.
Yeah, no, sorry, that was a good question. So I met my wife in Chicago, 2010. AptAmigo was really just in Chicago from, call it 2015 when we started until about 2018. And then I got my broker's license, and Rachel my COO got her broker's license 2016. So that's when I started locating, or like discovered locating. The appeal to me was that locating was way more efficient than doing leasing deals on the MLS. For you or the listeners, I'm not sure how familiar you are with, condo or, brokerage in general. But if you do an MLS rental, it's, 30% of 1 month's rent here in Austin. It's half a month's rent in Chicago, where we started, but it's 4 times the work. And in apartment locating, I don't think it's like a secret, the buildings pay more.
Yeah.
They just do, right? Like they have, bigger marketing budgets. So they'll typically pay like half a month's rent up to like 1.5 months rent for a tenant. And it's usually a little bit less work. Yeah. So for me, my brain is all about efficiency. It was like, oh my God, this is way more efficient.
Right.
Right. Like this is way more interesting. And over the course of like a year, I did about 100 locating transactions, which for people like Jordan, who are way, way better than me. You say, wow, it's really not that impressive. I had Rachel like sitting next to me, like helping me and like doing half of the work like the entire time. But basically a couple of recurring issues kept popping up. I really did feel like getting leads and my first like 40-minute, maybe not 40-minute, 30-minute phone call with a client, I would hang up the phone and be like, that's a deal. But then I'd have 10 to 12 hours of work to do to close the deal. So in Chicago, as an apartment locator, you have to escort your client to the properties to get paid. Here in Texas, you don't necessarily have to. The clients can kind of tour on their own.
Oh, I didn't know that.
So I was, I was this, Ivy League educated UChicago person who was touring apartments all day Saturday and all day Sunday, which didn't matter to me. It really didn't matter to me. But let's just say I got some looks from my peers.
Right. Like, what the heck are you doing?
I maybe even got some looks from like some of my family members. And I don't feel that way at all. I love what we do. And I think that my brokers are incredible, and what they add in terms of value is awesome. But there was like a little bit of a social stigma kind of in the background for me when I was doing this.
It's important for people to understand that, because I'm sure that there are people today going through that exact same thing.
Sure, and it can be for any number of reasons. It can be for feelings of elitism, or feelings of like you're working hard and I'm not, and I want to drag you down, right? Like there's any number of reasons kind of not to do something. But again, going back to like what motivates me, it's people like Jordan, people like the Graham brothers, right? Like they don't care,
right?
Like it's just like, I don't care if I have haters. I'm just going to go do what I'm going to do, and I'm going to be successful, and I don't need to ask you for permission. Right. So what I kind of learned was that first phone call was super, super valuable. But then after that first phone call, I might have 3 hours of work to like call and email buildings to schedule tours. And then I might have 6 or 7 hours of work to physically tour the client to kind of get a deal done. And like I said already, Chicago, you have to tour your client in locating to get a deal done. In Texas, you don't necessarily have to. And for me, I just kept thinking like, what if I could just do those 30-minute calls all day? If I could have 10 of them. Think of it if you're like a listing broker. What if you could just have listing presentations all day long? All day long. And then, of course, there's like a servicing component, right? Like you have to service your client. You have to put on the open house. But if you could have 5 listing meetings all day, you're going to be wildly successful, right? If you're a buyer's agent, if you could have 10 buyer's consults a day, you're going to make it, right? Like you're going to make it. I
think about it from like a lender's perspective. Where you make the money is on that lead. Like that's what brings in. If there's no leads, there's no money.
Yeah. There's selling and servicing, right? And so for me, there's, when I think about agents at sort of the different stages of their growth, there's a starting point where it's like you have no leads, right? Like, so selling and servicing candidly doesn't matter, right? So like the first and best use of your time is like, okay, how can I get leads? Like whether it's through the company I work with, or, shadowing somebody like Jordan, one of our agents in Austin, who's like a top producer already. Her name is Braylon. Like she kind of came in. So
proud of her.
She's incredible. Yeah. So she followed Jordan around for just a couple of months, and now she's just competing with Jordan on the top of the, on the top of the leaderboard, which is really, really awesome. But the point I was trying to make is that the first problem in real estate is like no leads, right? And so you have to kind of figure out a path to solving that problem, and that's a great use of time. Like iterating on editing, iterating on content, maybe iterating on, other platforms that you can advertise on. And then there's selling. Because what I can tell you from being in this industry from 10 years, a lead is more valuable to Jordan than it is to an average agent. The same lead, right? Like you can give Jordan a lead and she'll close 10 or 15 out of 100 or more. And you can give the same leads to, again, it's not their fault, less experienced agents or agents that haven't been mentored or trained as much, and they might close 0.
Yeah.
And it's the same leads, right? And I'm sure you feel this or know this in your industry as well, right? Yeah. So selling matters, right? And so my learning, it was just beating me over the head is like, okay, it's, getting the leads, selling the leads. And then don't get me wrong, there's always going to be a service component, but if you could just spend more time sourcing and selling on a relative basis than servicing, you'll make more money.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the philosophy that drives AptAmigo and Nav. That's like my experience in the role. So like, I'll give you an example. sometimes Jordan comes to me and says like, oh my God, I just toured, this client at 25 properties. I'm so miserable, like this, that, and the other thing. And my response to that is, well, can one of our newer agents help you tour?
Yeah.
Because if you're spending 30 hours touring somebody, you could be spending that getting more content, having more calls with clients, things like that. And I don't mean to call Jordan out. She's actually very, very efficient, but
yes.
Just because she's been on this podcast,
right,
and people might know who she is, right? My brain is all about, okay, if Jordan's out there selling, if Jordan's out there, generating content, she's going to be making a lot of money and good things are going to kind of happen.
Yeah, and for reference, that we are talking, if you haven't heard Jordan's podcast, you can go back and listen to it. But she did mention on there her social media, because she's like content queen, and her social media generates anywhere from like 200 to 300 leads a month.
Yep.
Which is anybody. I mean, you can be generating those leads, but if you don't have a system like AptAmigo and Nav, like how do you even manage all of that? There's just no, you're maxed out.
Yeah, it's hard, right? Like I'm not going to sit here and tell you that, agents that don't work for us still close deals, right?
Yeah.
Like that still happens. Yeah. My point was more about, getting up the selling learning curve and the lead generation learning curve. That's how you're successful as an independent agent, right? Like our platform is really more for that independent style agent. There are other great companies that I will say are probably better if you want to just have a flow of leads like coming in. But the other thing that I'll kind of say is that, where the software kind of came in, that you were so complimentary of was, when I think about that, call it 10 to 12 hours, like servicing my locating clients, 2 to 3 of those would be spent sending my client a list of viable options. And as silly as that might sound, it was true, because if a client says, hey, I'm moving December 1st, or let's just say January 1st, I want a 2-bed, I want it to be northwest facing, I want it to have a balcony, it needs to have a dog run. That is a lot of work, because that data doesn't really exist that way. If you go on Zillow, if you go on apartments.com, if you go on any of these websites, you're going to have to do a lot of clicking and a lot of calling to ask, like, is there a dog wash, right? Like, is there a unit that has a northwest facing balcony? And more often than not, the answer is no. Or yes, but it's for a different move date. Or yes, but the price point isn't what they want. And so there's a lot of manual work. And I'm not going to sit here and say that our software has solved all of it, because it definitely hasn't. But there's just a lot of manual work that a good apartment locator has to do up front to make sure that their client doesn't like show up to a building and immediately feel like they've just been wasting their time.
Right.
I can't tell you how many times, my first few months on the job, we'd show up to a building, the client would give the leasing agent their preferences. The leasing agent would say, we have nothing that meets your requirement. And then they would look at me and I knew right then and there I had just gotten fired.
Yeah.
Right. And so that's almost every locator has that experience at some point. And it's a very educational experience.
Right. Learning curve.
Right. So our platform was really all about trying to incorporate a lot of that data into a search tool that is way, way faster. And so like, instead of that 2 or 3 hour, effort required to run a good search for your client, maybe 5 or 10 minutes.
Wow.
And not only that, it's collaborative, right? So like, the platform that you might see or as a normal user on AptAmigo.com is very different from the one that like our agents and our clients kind of get to interact on. And so not only can you send a really good list if you're really good at your job in 5 or 10 minutes from your phone, you can collaborate with your client. You can tell them, hey, if you don't see if you think of something else that you might want to look at, look here. And that's really powerful for locators, in my experience, in my opinion, because renter clients, you have to meet them where they're at, meaning renter clients can, will, and do transact without a broker. If you think about residential buy-sell, they won't, or they don't, or they shouldn't, right? Like, so you have to, the big thing that I kept learning over the years was, why me? Why should my renter clients work with me? And I'd say that the number one reason, and this isn't really giving anything away from like a competitive standpoint, the number one reason is speed.
Right.
and you probably know this from your industry as well, and it's true in residential buy sell. You got to be fast, right?
Yeah.
Like you're in client services, right? So if you can get your clients what they're asking for faster than the competition, you'll win.
Period.
You'll win, right? And so like for me, a philosophy that I sort of drilled into my head in that first year was like under promise and over deliver. Under promise, over deliver. And, you know, my kids will probably be hearing that. You know, I've got a 5-year-old and a 3-year-old. Once they're old enough for that concept to make sense, I'm just going to drill it into their head, right? Like if you tell somebody you're going to get something to them in an hour and you get to them in 5 minutes, they're thrilled.
Yeah.
If you hang up the phone and say like, I'm pressing send right now, and it doesn't come for an hour, WTF.
Right.
Right. Like, you know, but it's still delivered probably in a good time frame, but like, you know, getting things to your clients faster and being able to kind of make and keep faster promises was what I felt like made me successful in the role.
So when you're doing this down in Chicago, and now the company is nationwide.
8 cities. Yeah, 8 cities. I wouldn't quite say nationwide because 4 of those cities are in Texas. But yeah, Chicago, the 4 big cities in Texas, Houston, Austin, Dallas, San Antonio. Denver was our second market, Nashville, and Atlanta.
Oh, wow, Nashville. I didn't realize that.
Yeah.
Okay. Yeah, that's amazing. And so you basically, that problem of you just spending X amount of time getting the deal and then having to work the deal, you're like, we got to develop a program. Is that when you went to your friend and you were like, this is the need I need solved? Or how did that?
Yeah, so that conversation happened in like April 2015, and that was what prompted quitting my job, starting AptAmigo as the like review website.
Okay.
And then that review website being a terrible idea and lighting money on fire was what prompted me to get my license in Chicago in 2016. And then we made our first like agent hire in August or September of 2017. And then our second one was our CRO, Danny. And this was all still in Chicago.
Okay.
So, yeah.
Yeah, so then when did, I guess, AptAmigo become what it is today from that review site?
Yeah, so we became a brokerage in 2016, but what I'll say is that we were a brokerage that primarily provided our agents with leads until about 2022, and then we kind of like pivoted to really lean into like the power of our software and our operations team. So another huge asset for our agents is we have an operations team that can like send guest cards, make phone calls to schedule tours, like help coordinate things in real time. Because again, going back to servicing the client, I felt like I spent hours doing that as well. And again, for someone like Jordan or a top agent, like getting leads and talking to leads initially are, in my opinion, the best uses of time. And so that was kind of what Rachel was for me, was she was kind of my like just air traffic controller.
Yeah.
Right. Like so just herding cats. Like she was doing it all, right? Like she was better at it than me. And that was the other big takeaway I had, you know, the company's changed a little bit, was that one person is not the best at doing all the 6 parts of the process that make a successful broker. Why not subdivide it and like delegate it to people who are really, really, really good at it?
Right. Yeah. So at what point did you pull out of doing the locating?
Yeah. So I did it for about a year. It was like April 2016 to May 2017. Our first sales hire, that actually doesn't add up. Our first sales hire was September 2017. So it was really about a year and a half. Okay. And then the moment that first sales hire and then Danny, our CRO, came in, they just blew me out of the water. They were so much better at it than I was. And I was much better as kind of, you know, I guess manager or mentor, you know, sort of the engineer behind the scenes, just trying to help them spend their time in the most efficient ways.
Yeah, which truly is what it is, because you have like big picture scope of like how this business is operating, and then you've brought on some, like, I would say heavy hitters like Jordan, right? And then the Graham brothers, personally, I was working with first Gavin, and then his brother Hayden got added on, and this last month was like their biggest month in Austin locally, but then also the company-wide as well.
Absolutely. And they've done a tremendous job. And I think what I'd say to everybody listening, if you want to get into real estate, or even regardless of what path you want to get into, personal branding is so important. What I think, I bet the company on, and somebody like Jordan has bet her career on, and the Graham brothers have kind of bet their career on, is personal branding. And in real estate, it's often referred to as sphere of influence. And there's a lot of ways to enhance your sphere of influence: events, outreach with clients, networking. But social media is a superpower. Like so much of our attention is on social media now, and it's just such a powerful tool. And it doesn't happen overnight, but it's so awesome to see like all the work that the Graham brothers and Jordan are putting in just pay off, right?
Yeah.
Like it's paying off for them. They deserve it, right? Like they're doing all the hard work.
Yeah. I'm
just back here trying to for the Graham brothers, for me and maybe for Jordan, it was really more about, hey, you don't have to service all your renters on the MLS. There's this whole like locating piece that, can create a better outcome for your clients and maybe create a better outcome for you. But at the end of the day, it's really about happy clients, right? Like I'll say that the Graham brothers do an incredible job nurturing powerful, strong relationships with their clients. And for me, what I want to help them do is just say yes. Right? Like instead of, maybe they get a client that was like, okay, I want to live in a downtown high rise. And they might look on the MLS and they might see a third of really what's available for that client. Now they can see it all.
Right.
Right. And is every client going to live in a rental building? No.
Yeah.
They do deals that are MLS or condo or things of that nature. But, my hope for them is like just be able to say yes to more people and be able to service more people with their excellent level of customer service, so that it compounds and those people continue to be clients for them kind of down the road.
Because I was working with them prior to them being a part of NAV, and they're like, yeah, we made a move. It's awesome. We'll be able to, because I don't think focus so much on locating at all or leasing at all. It was all just buy sell. So they have a lot of experience in buy sell. And then they're like, we just are able to get the whole piece of the pie instead of just like one piece of the pie, which would be buy sell. And I was like, oh, that's amazing. Like,
exactly. And we created NAV. We haven't gotten to that part of the story. So that we didn't create NAV until Jordan joined. And she joined almost exactly a year ago, just a little over a year.
So tell the listeners what the difference is between, what is NAV. So AptAmigo is
AptAmigo is like the apartment locating brand and the apartment locating platform. So AptAmigo.com is kind of the website that our, renter clients can come to and, reach out for help. It's the website that our agents use to kind of collaborate with their clients. And the NAV agency is a brand we launched about a year ago for residential buy sell. And we did it based on a lot of feedback internally. I think that if you get into real estate, it's inevitable, or mostly inevitable, not everybody, but most agents want to get into buy sell. Selling sunset is, is a big part of kind of the zeitgeist of American culture now, right? Like nice houses, growing into that sort of stuff. And, AptAmigo is sort of a, renter playful type brand, whereas the NAV agency, we wanted to like really elevate the brand, be a little bit more luxurious, grow with our clients, like grow with our agent base so that they had an opportunity to just continue to grow, as well. Now, what I'll say is that everybody has access to the same platform, like whether you're in the NAV agency or AptAmigo, everybody gets access to like the same tools, the same support, the same teams. It's really just kind of a natural kind of growth for the company. Like we'll always do leasing. Like AptAmigo, I think will kind of always be there. But we want to build the NAV agency into kind of this, luxury residential real estate brand so that our agents can kind of grow with their clients and get there if they want to.
And that's, I think, amazing, because when you do work with a lot of agents, I had a chance to take your team leads from Texas, so from Houston and then Dallas, Sarah and Rachel, and along with Jordan to one of our banks in Detroit, and got to know them personally, one-on-one. And they're all really great at social media. Absolutely. And they were rock stars, I think, there, because I think real estate is more of like, it's still a handshake business and a phone call business. And so I think you guys are pioneering the way of social media is where these buyers and, apartment locators are reaching out to. But they're doing a really good job at being able to offer both sides.
Absolutely. And I mean, they are tremendous at social media, better than they're the best. I specifically downloaded TikTok so I could recruit Jordan, and I'm very comfortable sharing that story. I was scared to do it, but it all kind of worked out.
Yeah.
But I think that, you have to meet your clients where they are, right? Like, I think, there's eyeballs on Zillow, there's eyeballs on Redfin, but a personal connection is basically what all the stats on social media say people are screaming for, right? Like, maybe, we're sitting in a place called Collective here in Austin, and there's like a lot of in real life connection going on here that I think they've really done a great job of tapping into. But even on social media, people want to, when they see the Graham brothers make a video, or one of our market leads, or Jordan, they're like, they want to work with them, right? Like, they know who they are, right? Like, it's not just a post of a nice apartment or a post of a nice house, right? Which, again, you can see on Redfin or Zillow. They want to know who they're working with, right? Like, and I think for these types of purchases, it is really, really important to have that kind of human connection.
That and it breeds loyalty in a way as well. I actually was going to church, and one of my friends from church, his name is Tony. He was like, "Oh yeah, Jordan's the person that I used to get my apartment." And then I guess whoever she was with before was calling and saying, "Hey, your lease is almost up. We would love to help you." And he's like, "No way. Like, I'm going with Jordan." And they've never met.
Right.
And I'm like, this is amazing, the power of social media to create that loyalty and a sense of like friendship.
Well, I'm going to be totally honest, right? Like, our clients, and by our, I mean like AptAmigo or Nav, sure, they might recognize AptAmigo, they might recognize Nav, but to your point, they recognize the Graham brothers, and they recognize Jordan Wainwright or Braylon, any of these other agents way more than they recognize us. And so I really want to be kind of that person supporting them.
And
right?
to the listeners, I will say, like, to get you on the podcast, I think you're like, okay, yes, let's do it, because you are so used to being the person that's behind the scenes, never the one that's in front and talking about
and I'm an introvert, so I'm more comfortable behind the scenes. I think it's great what all of my agents are doing to build their personal brands, and I just want to help them. I want to help them spend more time both building them and making money from them, right? Like that's what we're all kind of in real estate. You're kind of here to do that, right? There's nothing wrong with that.
Yeah. And I would say, I'm sure all of your agents would say the same thing, like a big thank you to you and your wife for having gone through it, because it's very few people to develop what you are currently developing. I mean, it still hasn't even reached its peak,
No, and there's been a lot of hard lessons over the years. I will say that probably the most difficult one to learn is it's best to manage real estate agents kind of almost as little as possible. Leading by example for people like Jordan works a heck of a lot better than telling people what you think is better for them to do. And that was a hard learned lesson, but also knowing where our strengths are, knowing where our weaknesses are, right? Like the platform, being able to say yes to more people. But it's definitely been a journey.
Yeah. Well, and just for you all to have put your backs against the wall and burning the ships essentially, right? Like closing that door and knowing that your back was against the wall and you went all in. That was a lot of like hard moments to develop what you have now.
Oh, absolutely. I mean,
family-wise.
My wife can have plenty of stories of hard moments over
What was
the
her
years.
journey alongside? Because she's an attorney. Was she just starting off while you were starting off, or?
So when I first met her, she was in law school. So this was 2010, and I was. She might be upset at me for saying this, but I was kind of a safe pick, right? Like in a partner, because I was sort of, he went to Cornell, he's at U Chicago, he's in private equity, like he's, got a good career, a good stable career ahead of him. And then I kind of got out of business school and pulled hey, I want to start a company, right? And like not make any money for a little while. And to my wife, she deserves the utmost credit. She supported me. There were difficult times, right? Like when she was the only person making money for a little while. But she has always felt like this is hers too, right? Like she'll show up, you know, she's given me some, you know, free legal advice over the years. I would not call it, you know, purely free, but, and I will say that if you can marry a lawyer as an entrepreneur, it is kind of a cheat code because inevitably, you know, her brother-in-law told me a story, and he is a successful builder of like high-end car dealerships, big guy, right? Like sort of that type of personality. And when I met him when I was just starting the company, and he said, Dan, are you ready for people to come after you if you're successful? I'm like, sure, yeah, having no idea what that means. And not in a bad way, but, you know, anytime you do anything successful, people, you know, want to copy you, or you know, you get haters in the comments on social media or things of that nature. And I will say that as an introvert, my learning curve for dealing with that took a little bit longer, but I'm very lucky that I had my wife, because she's very, very good at kind of just meeting people where they're at and not sort of suffering BS.
Right. Yeah.
Yeah. But so she started her law career, I guess, you know, she graduated from law school in 2015, and then I think she got a job right then and there, and she's been working as a kick-ass trial attorney for a bunch of different places for many years. So,
wow.
Yeah.
It's hard. I mean, I guess it's easier when you meet somebody a little bit younger and then you kind of grow together, but then you also grow together. Like you're both getting your careers established. Oh, absolutely. Which is so hard.
And I mean, this journey professionally for me has changed kind of both of our personalities, I would say.
Yeah.
Like, you know, if she were on the very aggressive side and I was on the less aggressive, more introverted side, we both kind of moved to the middle.
Probably because you both, you know, pulled each other, right?
We pulled each other, and, you know, we dealt with adversity, right?
Yeah.
Like, and adversity sort of changes people over time.
And you do have 2 kids. So at what point were you like, because I can only imagine, right? Like as a kid, you don't necessarily see the bad times, right? Or you don't think of them as bad times. But at the same time, like, I mean, I remember my parents going through, they would build spec homes and sell them, and they got caught up in the 2008 crash, right? And I remember like, wait a minute, you know, are the lights on? But not really understanding what that meant. Like, oh, we're going to go play at the park. Okay, you know? And so that for your kids, what was that timeline while you were building the company?
So I think the most difficult time for the company was like 2021 to like almost, you know, mid 2023. And my son was born in 2019, and my daughter was born in 2021. So they were young kids, and so I was just very sleep deprived, right? Like, and probably a little bit more stressed, and so was my wife. But they were also very young, so they didn't. You know, I don't think they necessarily knew anything or know any different. They might have been able to sense our stress or things of that nature. But you know, I will say that my entrepreneurial experience has definitely shaped my parenting philosophy in that I really, you know, one of my favorite parts of what I do is seeing people from all walks of life be wildly successful, like way more successful maybe than people that have, you know, the great grades and the great degrees from, you know, the prestigious institutions. And so, you know, it certainly made me way less of an elitist if I ever was one, you know, and the way that's influenced my thoughts on parenting is passion or necessity, like to kind of have like this full circle moment. If my children find something that they're passionate about or they almost like can't help working on, as long as it's something that might make some money, right? You know, there's obviously exceptions. They're going to be fine. Like I think of examples of, you know, the best musicians in my high school, they work as studio technicians in LA and they make a bunch of money, right? And now with podcasting, right, they could do things like that. But back when I was young, you know, there wasn't like, my parents didn't actually put pressure on me to succeed academically. They sort of managed me by saying like, hey, Dan, as long as you're doing as well as you think, you know, we're cool. And for me, that was like, well, am I doing as well as I think, right? Like, could I have gotten a 96 on the test instead of a 94, right? But for me, it's like, you know, did the gravel king of Phoenix, you know, go to Harvard?
Yeah.
No. Does he have $300 million? Yeah. Like, did, you know, some of my agents they might not have gone to college, and they make a ton of money.
Yeah.
And that's awesome, right?
Yeah.
It's great, right?
Yeah.
And so I'd say that's probably, because my kids were too young to recognize the stress, but it's more just like, I just have that kind of perspective that I think I'll, impart on my
That's
kids.
amazing wisdom from like a business owner, but from a parent to start to like navigate. Because my parents have always said, because they've always been entrepreneurs as well. And when we were younger, they were gone a lot, but we don't necessarily remember that, me and my siblings. But my parents have always said, when you have kids, they're going to need you more when they're older than when they're younger, because when they're younger, it's like give them a bottle. But when they're older and they need to be taught these life lessons is when they need you most, Yeah.
I would agree with that. I mean, as they get smarter and understand like cause and effect and like, specifically actions have consequences, right? Like you sort of, as a parent, you start to see that where they, recognize patterns and like, oh, if I do this, like people won't play with me, or like, sharing is a tough one, I will say, as like a parent of young kids. Like it's not intuitive to share, but once you learn that, hey, if I share this thing, then the next time I might get something in return, right? Like, but yeah, no, I agree with that.
Yeah. So, I mean, and for what you and your wife have done, just like basically like standing in the gap to piece all of this together, make the sacrifices for all of these other agents to come along and grow their own businesses for their own future family. It's truly a legacy of what you're creating for so many people.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. I think I try to just stay out of their way and help them not spend their time on bad uses of time. But, it's, we want to help. Like I want to help. I genuinely do.
Yeah. And I think to that, because in talking to Jordan and just people that work with the agents on like the management level, right, whenever they're just interacting with the agents, I think the agents that do best, like you said, are ones that want to be independent, that aren't asking necessarily for the hand holding, but are going to do whatever it takes to go out. Like I think of Braylon, because when I first met her, she was also just getting her feet wet, especially on the buy sell side, but then she just took off. So she really took what Jordan was doing and implemented in her own like creative, and then to see her explode, I'm like, wow, you guys really have the tools for those that will take them and do the work.
Absolutely. Yeah. I'd say, when we have new agents start, I talk to them for about 30 minutes, and I only have like a few stories, but probably the most important story, and maybe I need to tweak my presentation a little bit, is that, in life, but especially in real estate, you are the company you keep. Not especially in real estate, in life, it's even more important, right? Like a, spouse is maybe more important than your professional, group. But I can't tell you how many talented people decide to isolate themselves, just work from home every day, right? Like not get out of the house, not go get the content, right? Or who decide that they want to only talk to the people that are at their level or lower, right? And I'm not saying in a bad way. It's just like the natural social,
absolutely,
selection process where they're like, okay, these are my friends, right? Like the people who choose to, spend more of their professional time with the people that are at or above their level rise, right? And so you really are in real estate, because it is, it's a commission business, right? Like you eat, what you produce. And there's not a lot of secrets to what the top agents are really doing. There really aren't. It really is one of the, don't get me wrong.
Tell us the secret.
Yeah, I wish there was a secret. Everybody wants the shortcut, and everybody wants the secret. Everybody looks at people like the Graham brothers and people like Braylon and people like Jordan and others, and they're like, what's the secret? They work really hard.
Yeah, they put in the work.
And probably the best example I can give is social media. We have a lot of agents who want to, how do you edit, Jordan, right? Like, or, how do you film? Well, she's done a lot of trainings talking about how she films. She thinks of things as like a photo when she makes her videos, right? Like free advice, right? Like this isn't the secret sauce, right? Like you can see it from her content. The hard part is doing it. The hard part is, okay, it's cloudy today. I don't feel like getting content. The content probably won't get as much engagement, but if you're Jordan, you still do it.
Do it anyway.
You do it anyway. Yeah. It's like working out, right? Like, and it's probably some of the power of, a place like Collective that we're sitting in right now. or a personal trainer or a group or, you know, things like CrossFit, right? It's like, okay, it's a cloudy day. I don't feel like waking up today, but I'm still going to do it.
Absolutely.
'Cause that does count. It really does compound in life, but especially in real estate as well.
Oh yeah, it's I don't know if you've read the book The Compound Effect, but it's exactly that. Over time, just putting in the work. And I remember when I first met Jordan, and she was like, she outworks everyone. And
Absolutely.
It's because she will post 2 videos a day. One of our buyers actually with the Graham Brothers that we just closed, mega influencer.
Yep.
And I asked him like, hey, what at his level, like, what's the secret? And he's like, people think like, oh, you're a content creator. Like, no, you are an editor. He's like, I'm an editor. Mm-hmm. I'm like, you have to, because I don't love editing. He's like, just say you're an editor. Okay, I'm an editor.
I mean, that's a very powerful reframing, right?
Yeah.
Like that's because, you know, there's a lot of, I'm not a super philosophical person, but, you know, I do subscribe to the belief that if you get out of bed and do the hardest thing or the thing you want to do the least on your checklist first, you're gonna have really good days. Right? And editing, if you're a content person, is the hardest thing. And so if you think of yourself and you frame yourself like, I'm an editor, well, that means that you have to edit every day or whatever, you know, whatever your working schedule looks like. And
right.
So now you've sort of, you know, that's brilliant, right? Like now he's not thinking of it as like, oh, it's the worst thing I have to do. I don't want to look forward to it. It's like, that's my job.
That's literally my job.
Yep.
And I have to do it every day.
Yep.
To get paid. Yep. And same thing applies in this industry. Absolutely.
Yep.
Yeah. I'm so thankful to have had you on today,
Oh, thank you so much for having me. I really, really appreciate it.
Yes. It was when I first met you, I was like, because they're like, oh, he's so introverted. And I'm like, but you shared so much that day with your story. And I was like, wow, I mean, to have leadership, because for me as a, you know, what I know in the mortgage broker industry and who I partner with on the broker side, it's like, I need to make sure that they've got my back.
Sure.
You know? And I think all of the agents that are part of your team, they know that you have their back. And with that, like, I mean, you're limitless in this industry.
Well, I appreciate you saying that. And I do have their back. I do feel that way. Do we make mistakes? Absolutely. Do I want to fix them immediately? Yes. So,
we're human.
We're human.
As well.
We're human. We're human. But I do believe in just real estate being that platform for anybody. I really, really, really do. Like, we have an agent who I don't want to, you know, he'll know who he is if he's listening to this, but he just got his first, call it 5-figure paycheck. And he used it to get a new apartment and to help get his dad out of credit card debt.
Wow.
And he didn't go to an elite Ivy League school. He didn't go to like UT. He didn't, he just worked hard. He listened, and he got to reap the benefits. And that's cool. And that doesn't just happen here, you know, in real estate, but it's just really cool for me to play a small part in that. It really is. Like,
that gives me chills.
Yeah, it's awesome. And he deserves all the credit, right?
Yeah.
Like, he, you know, picked good people that he learned from. He picked people that were doing better than him. He was a sponge. He always was asking questions. He was at the pizza dinner that you were at. I'll tell you who it is after this meeting, because I just don't want to, you know, call him out or anything. But, you know, Jordan and I were texting about that, and that's an awesome feeling.
Man.
It's great.
It's those little like nuggets that you live for. You're like, we're like doing something. We're on a finite level changing people's lives, truly.
Helping people change their own lives. It's like how I would frame it. Like I'm just trying to like be a platform make AptAmigo or Nav a platform where that can happen, right? Like that's the cool part for me, right? Like, they deserve all the credit for what they do. I just like being a part of it.
Yeah. Wow. Guys, if you all were listening to all of this, I hope you could feel Dan's heart, your heart behind truly what operates AptAmigo and Nav Agency, and why some of these big agents have decided to totally sell out, and it's really exponentially moved their careers. I know the other day you posted on your story, and it was like, you didn't put the names attached to it, but just like the amounts that people were making, because that's also what's really cool. It's competitive.
It's competitive
within
and real
friendly competition.
Friendly competition, but I think real estate is competitive. I'd say maybe a third of my interactions with Jordan now are about like are about like making her competitive juices flow a little bit. But that's also fun too, right? Like it is a sales business. Agents, they're paid on commission. They're trying to make money, and there's again, really the company you keep point, right? Like if you see success and you see it being done in a variety of different ways, then the hope is you're more likely to get up and go get it.
Right. My dad always says a rising tide raises all ships.
Absolutely. Could not agree more.
And that's exactly what it is at your company.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for being on.
Thank you so much for having me. I really
feel like
appreciate it.
in a couple months, maybe even a year, because you have had some significant growth over the last just like year.
We've grown very fast this past year. It's been a good year after a couple of challenging years, and we want to have an even bigger 2025.
Yeah. So we'll have you back on, and we'll see where you guys are at.
Cool. I'd love to be back. Thank you so much.
Thank you.